Hello. Yeah, groovy.
Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law.
What am I supposed to say? Love is the law, love underwill.
Yes, I'm greeting you in my high-ranking robes because this is my bathrobe. It's extremely cold in my house. Good to meet you.
Nice to meet you as well. Yeah, I feel like I've been aware of you for well, is it 20 years or something? I don't know. It's a
That's
long
a lot
time.
of years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Tell me if I'm wrong about this, but I always got the impression for you that you were just doing Magick, and then that was it. Like that there
What
wasn't
do you
really.
mean by that?
Well, I don't know if it's exactly the same. So please correct me if I'm wrong, but um, so from my perspective, my I thought when I moved to London I was going to be a musician and do music and all this other shit, right? But really that was all just a surface level excuse to get me to keep pursuing the magic that I've been doing since I was much younger, right? And it was like I'd been held in place where I grew up, and that was the one outlet, is that maybe I could do something with music. So I
Okay.
got to London
Okay.
and I joined the IoT pretty much straight away.
Yeah,
It was
yeah.
just dicking about. And then I met Duncan and we started doing the Baptist Head, and I'm just messing about. Like it's just of course I'm doing it all the time and I'm writing, but it's not serious. Um but at the same time, obviously it's the only thing that I'm doing, and it's the only thing I have done and the only thing I can do, and I can't do anything else. And I've tried to do other things, but I can't do those other things. It's just this is the
Magic.
trajectory, and this is it, and this is where it's going.
Yeah.
Tried I mean for me, when after 2009, I then just started teaching full time. So you can kind of make a living doing that. Uh, so I was explicitly, so it wasn't I was teaching the magic per se. It was that it was people. I was guiding people through the process of waking up, and I was trying to figure that out. What do you do with that? Because charging money is apparently unethical, but it's like, how else do you do what you're going to do? We don't live in the East, you don't get
Right.
whatever,
Right.
whatever. Retreat stuff. I did that for about 10 years, and then I tried to make it a sustainable thing, and then it all just fell apart. But either way, it's like it doesn't matter what you're going to do. You're just going in this direction. Doesn't matter
Yeah,
what you
yeah.
name. Just going to be, going in that direction. And then the Magia stuff came along in 2019, and then things have just gotten, I mean, just weirder, since then. But I mean, thankfully, I'm in a position now where I can just do whatever I want to do. I don't have to worry too much financially, but I got the impression that there was a similar, that you were following a similar course in the sense
Yeah.
of you don't seem to be doing anything else. I mean, I know that you did some was it journalism stuff or
Yeah, well, I was always a journalist, and that was what I trained for, and
yeah.
but that is how it's been for me, to my chagrin. I could have been anything, Alan.
Well, I know I know that feeling. I know that feeling. Sometimes I sit and think I could have been anything. I could have done.
Yeah, yeah, I know. It's like if you think about the fucking cognitive overhead and dogged persistence and just like sheer ridiculousness of doing this, it's like if you put 10% of that effort into any normal person career, you would be like head of the company, and it's like this level of obsessionality is not normal. But for me, and I get apparently for you, it's like, yeah, it's like you don't have a choice. I mean, like, yeah, like I've been doing this since 17 and professionally since 18. Well, first published thing on Magic was at 20, and technically 16. Thinking about William Burroughs, and then so that was 1997 because that was when Burroughs died, and then basically it's been this ever since. And um, I tried with all of my might to escape it, and that it just, yeah, kept trying to get out, and they kept dragging me back in. So I did some, did some stinting around the corporate world, and other types of writing. which was I learned a tremendous amount and was all grist for the mill, I think, for when they inevitably dragged me back to this fucking horrific job.
So is that what you do now? You just do is it magic.me?
Yeah.
Yeah. I saw
And the
your
podcast and the YouTube and books and all of that.
yeah, I saw your video, What's in My Bag.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I enjoyed that.
Yeah, I saw. I wasn't there in that episode when we went, but I went to that shop earlier, and they had your Magia book. Which
Really?
Think of you, yeah.
Really?
Yeah, in Central Texas. So I was like, wow, Alan, and I was reading it, and I was like, wow, Alan's gone out there. I got to talk to him. I'm like, let's.
Well, what's more outrageous is that someone gave it away.
Oh, now you're up. Yeah, now you're upset. Wait, was that like confidential material?
No, I just mean, because the book's so amazing, and why would
Okay,
someone...
so good, right? Of course, yeah. Right.
Yeah. But no, I'm actually more surprised just because it's it's just published via Amazon.
Okay.
I don't know why I'm surprised that would end up in a bookshop. I guess I just don't think of self-published stuff as a real book. I guess I don't know.
Oh no, it looked great. It looked great. Yeah, no, it's popping off here in Texas, the occult world. We got barbecue, we got grilling, we got people mad at their evangelical parents. That's a good recipe for occultism.
Yeah.
So where are you at now? Because I know that, and I guess I guess we're technically in the podcast now, right? So, if you're good, so
I'm good.
Yeah, I'll just cut all the I'll just cut the stuff about specific people prior. So, where are you at? Because I see you kind of like you were doing Baptist Head, and then you kind of like you kind of cycle in and out of phase. Like you disappear for a while, then you come back with a new kind of branded identity, and then you disappear and then come back. So an interesting magical strategy, very interesting camouflage tactic that I've appreciated from afar. Nice that you can do it. Where are you at now?
Yeah, well, my excuse for that is that happened during a 10-year period from 2009 to about 2019. And the reason that happened, and it's something that's followed me around a little bit, people still make comments.
Oh, hello. I just heard people. You said people still make comments, and then it froze.
Okay, yeah, it froze mine as well.
Let me. I actually realized I have a VPN on. Let me make sure I turn that off. If I disconnect, I'm just going to reconnect real quick.
Okay.
But hello. There we go. Okay, great. Okay. All right. Where were we?
So you were commenting on the fact that I've cycled through different names.
Yes. You were talking about that period of 2009 to 2019.
Yeah. So after the Baptist Head period with working with Duncan, which culminated in me going to India and meeting a guru called Arunachala Ramana, and the awakening that I talk about or describe in the Baptist Head. After that period, my preoccupation with magic per se or tradition fell away, and what I was most interested in was talking about it in an honest and fresh way. As a human being talking to another outside of institutions or by old language or that kind of a thing. It was a bad move. Soon as I started a project called Open Enlightenment, all the Zen crowd and the Neo-Advaita people turned up to tell me that I can't possibly be talking about what I'm talking about.
Wait, are they super territorial?
It's that weird thing where some people will get involved in a tradition or a teaching or an area of study, and they will fuss over the details and show a great give a good appearance of getting their hands dirty with the details and the facts, that kind of a thing. And they do it precisely to keep the reality of what that tradition is talking about as far away from themselves as possible. So it's like a self-preservation tactic, right?
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, people definitely do that with magic, I think, when they get all super academic and they need to like do but like not to knock academic writing about magic because it's great, but people can do that to try to, or they get into the, even like with stuff like Kabbalah or New Age theories, they need to like wrap a theoretical framework around it so that they can separate themselves from it and get some distance. And yeah, I get that.
Yeah, so there's it accounts for why there are some Buddhists who think you can't talk about awakening, despite the Buddha being the awakened one.
Wait, what?
Yeah.
What?
Now, to be generous though, there are some people, and I think these are these will be the people at the heart of these traditions who've got enough experience under their belts to understand that there is some virtue in some things remaining veiled, right? In the sense that talking about awakening can have its downsides, right? I mean, with me and Duncan, the work that we did with the Baptist Head.
So that's Duncan Barford.
Duncan Barford, yeah.
Yeah.
Part of it was a reaction to the spiritual climate that we were in, which is that this stuff doesn't really exist. Or if you're going to aim for profound spiritual realization, it's some heroic thing that you need, some heroic task that you have to perform. It's for a very few, elite people, that kind of a thing. We were coming from a chaos magic order or background where some of this stuff was kind of poo-pooed. Crowley's description of the great work and that kind of thing had been out the window. So we were kind of responding to that, and there was some virtue in talking about experience, just to say that this is how we're finding it. This is how we're honestly describing it as best we can with all of our faults and our delusions. This is the best that we can do. But look, it seems like what people talked about in the past is actually real, right? Yes. Real possibility for you.
Yeah.
Right. So there's some virtue there, but the problem is that you can become inflated as a result of that kind of experience. Often it happens someone can have a full-blown realization, profound non-dual realization, but what's left of themselves inflates and fills up the space, and they may not go any further than that. That's described in the literature. Crowley describes it. Other traditions talk about it. Thinking that you're done, that you've achieved everything, that there's nowhere else to go, kind of a thing. It's that's just as much of a trap as thinking that you need to wrestle with your suffering and your demons. Solve those problems before you can have realization. It's a similar kind of trap. Wrestling with the darkness or holding on to the light, both of these things are to miss the point. It's the thing that's traveling through both of those things that we're interested in. So I think that there are some real teachers in some traditions, and they say, well, it's best not to talk about that stuff, but they do behind closed doors, and I can understand that there's some wisdom in that. And immediately, as soon as you start talking about these experiences, it does become profaned. So the language can get confused, the terms can get confused, people can. Well, there are two things I always say to students, and it's a nice way of orienting yourself. You simultaneously think too much of yourself and too little of yourself.
Yeah, I like that.
Wherever your leading edge is in terms of your practice or your realization or your growth, is by definition the most profound thing you've ever encountered. So you think a lot of it, and you could think a lot of yourself as a result of that. But there's always something else over the horizon.
Yeah, I love that. That's a great point. Yeah.
By definition, it's beyond everything that you've experienced in the past.
Yeah. I mean, it does seem that people kind of grab on to something and identify with it, and then it
Mm.
becomes, and that's of course a classic trap.
But no
Instead of
matter how
letting it
profound,
go through.
yeah, no matter how profound the realization might be, if you take it to be yourself, you're thinking too little of yourself. Yeah, if you go around calling yourself a prophet or a god, you think too little of yourself.
I like that. That's great. That's great.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, so I can appreciate that's why, some people turned up, say those things. Some people, especially when it
So
comes,
they wanted to gatekeep gaslight girl boss you, like they wanted to they wanted it for themselves.
all of that, yeah, all of
Okay.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. But then it's also, the threatening nature of the reality of what we're talking about. Come Even if it's tangentially, it's now in your world, isn't it? It seems like there's something now in the world that shouldn't be there, and it's
Well,
threatened.
let's talk about that. Is it dangerous, or do people really make a big deal about their thing? You know what
Um,
I mean?
the dangers that I discovered over the 10 years of teaching, um, waking up outside of a tradition can be bad news. And encountering the stuff for yourself on your own terms can be bad news. Doing it without a teacher, you think you can do it without a teacher, but you're always the beneficiary of teachers that have come before you. Even if you meditate
Right.
on your own in
Of course.
the book,
So,
someone
so you're talking about the process of seeking enlightenment.
yes.
Yeah. Okay. So
Although,
specifically,
yeah, yeah,
not like what Golden Dawn ceremonial chaos magic. You're talking about the seeking enlightenment process.
yes, but
Okay.
I would say I would qualify that by saying that that's what magic actually is.
Should be certainly.
But
Yeah.
I can circle around to that. But yes, so the dangers: waking up without a teacher, doing it without a lineage. That there are traditions and institutions that exist that have encountered all of the states that people could talk about and describe. They have ways of accommodating that stuff. If you understand that, you've had this profound awakening, and then there's someone before you and someone after you, countless people after you that have had the same thing or more, it's a nice way of contextualizing where you're at.
Yeah.
There are lots of stories of abusive gurus who have had horrendous awakenings. So, as an example, someone like Andrew Cohen,
Mhm.
I don't know but that guy is the
Yeah.
evolutionary dude. When he had his awakening, and it was via transmission with a guy who also experienced transmission with Ramana Maharshi. So this guy was called Papaji. He
Yeah.
went to see Ramana Maharshi. He had an awakening, but that was it. There was no contextualizing, no institutional teaching, nothing. He had an awakening in his presence. He waited a very long time. Andrew Cohen came. He met him. He had his awakening in his presence. It was a process that went on for a little bit. And then when Andrew went to him and said, "Look, this extraordinary thing has happened to me, and I can't believe it," Papaji said this to him. He said, "You're the one I've been waiting for. You're going to go off to the West and cause a revolution amongst the young." And he gave
Oh no. Oh no.
wait, he gave him a scroll that he'd made, right, listing all the awakened people since the Buddha. And I don't know why he picked the Buddha, because he's not a Buddhist, but like it went from the Buddha, all these names, and Andrew Cohen's at the bottom. And he gave him that and said, "Go out and
Wait,
go
do we
to-"
know this for sure? Because this sounds a little fishy.
Yeah, no, it's true, it's real.
Oh, it's real. Okay. Okay. Well, why would you do that?
They do that in Zen, They give the little scroll with the names.
Okay. Okay.
That's an institutionalized parody of what transmission is, but it exists in Zen traditions, yeah, for sure. But yes, that's what he did, and that's an extraordinarily bad, first step forwards.
Yeah, I was thinking about having him on the podcast actually, because he's doing an apology tour. He put a book out.
Another one.
Oh, I don't follow him that closely, but this maybe a year ago, or so, he put a book out. So, but I was just like, yeah, probably shouldn't do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's now the dangers are kind of what I talked about before. You holding on to the light and taking yourself to be that, thinking that you're done and that you can stop there.
Yeah.
Bad beliefs. We have lots of bad beliefs in the West. There are beliefs we don't want to let go of, cultural beliefs.
What are some of the worst?
That you can have a profound, abiding, non-dual realization and still hold on to certain beliefs. But if you want to go any further, they can't go with you. You can't go any further because it gets too miraculous after that. You can't hold on to these things. So I'm thinking of people like Sam Harris, those kinds of people.
Okay.
Genuine realization, but if you want to hold on to this brain stuff, if you want to hold on to the secular stuff, you're not going any further.
Yeah. You have to at least be able to set it to the side momentarily, which in itself takes, or is it, or do you feel, must you permanently lose your mind, Alan?
Well, you don't need to lose your mind. I would say you've already lost your mind if you think if you think anything to do with neuroscience is going to help you in any way.
Okay.
I don't know if you've ever surveyed the literature, but it's
not really, actually.
Yeah, I spent some time when I was teaching. I spent some time. Some of my students took part in research at Harvard and in other places where they were doing the blobology thing. You know, where you scan brains to see what's going on in the brain. It's just like there's some blood here and there's some blood there, and we virtually know nothing about the brain. Very extraordinarily little amount, despite what people think. I put some research together because I thought the research around awakening was so abysmally bad that maybe I could do a better job. We did a pilot study, that kind of a thing. But I'm saying all this just to say that that I had to do a brief survey of the literature there. I did it with one of my students was a PhD in neuropsychology. I think he specialized in.
Not much. That's interesting.
It's very not to go off on a tangent, but our scientific
podcast,
like our institutions are in free fall. Our science institutions, it's extraordinary. The basics of study design, replicability, all of these things. Like it was a disaster in psychology. It's the same in neuroscience, even in astrophysics. Obviously in the medical field, it's pretty awful. But
wait, what's happening? It's just.
It turns out just briefly. It turns out that much of the I'll give you an example from the neuroscience stuff from like the last 30 years can't be replicated, and it turns out the study design has been so poor. So it's like a study design with a sample size of 1 for some of these studies. Some of the things said about the brain, conclusions that are drawn. If you really want to get into it, there's a great book by someone in Wittgenstein's philosophical lineage who applies Wittgenstein's philosophical method to the language around neuroscience.
That's interesting. That's very interesting.
That's the
first project.
When you see the conclusions people draw as well from the data, even if the data is correct or what a paper says, that's also interesting. Using an analogy of talking about like the brain filing things away.
Yeah.
Like it's worker. So it's like using the metaphor of a human being to understand the brain, to understand a human being.
Yeah, you would think from the get-go somebody would have thought that through. And that's the thing. I mean, it's like I feel that science is the great product of the Western medical tradition and is the great kind of hope for bringing humanity out of its state of misery. But it's like people reflexively say, "Oh, science," it's like science, science, science. And then it's like magical people, if they're serious, often are scientifically literate. And then you look at the studies and it's like, what the hell is this? Like, I've never heard of a study with a sample size of 1. That's pretty crazy.
Yeah,
I've seen some pretty bad ones.
Yeah, it's extraordinarily bad. Psychology. So it's like a lot of things just can't be replicated. And then it's basic stuff. Like people don't understand that you can do a study, but one study on its own doesn't mean anything.
Yeah.
You need a lot of studies, and you need to do meta studies, and then you got to get into statistics. Before you can even begin to say anything about anything.
Well, also, it's not helped by the press, where which often reports like surveys of literature, for instance, as groundbreaking studies. Like they'll report social social science surveys as as if it was an astrophysics breakthrough or something like that. So, and then they hype everything up for the news headline. So that doesn't help.
Yeah, but a lot of that stuff is, there are bad incentives. There's a great book about a guy called Ben Goldacre. It's called Bad Science. He teaches doctors how to read medical scientific literature.
They don't know.
And it's well, they need training, right? So
Oh, okay. This is in their training. I thought you meant I thought you meant it was remedial work.
yeah, no. Well, they could use that, couldn't they?
Yeah.
It's a short book, but it's a great introduction just for people to get a grasp of what science is like. Me saying all this, by the way, I am. I don't want to give the wrong impression. I think that the institutions should be saved. I think people should. we need good people.
I always tell people it's like you only need a few crazy wizards. That's more than enough. Like we want.
Wizards have always been empiricists. That's a thing. Like sometimes you look at Crowley's stuff. He talks about the aim of religion and the method of science, or or you can approach, doing a magical act like an experiment. So you can do it and then you see what you get. Like, and then
did you ever see my John Dee book?
I did. I read it. Yeah.
Oh, okay, cool. Yeah. So I talked about that a lot in there. The empiricism, Francis Bacon, and that time.
Oh, but I'm talking about 2,500 years ago.
Oh, okay. So, how so?
So if you go back to the pre-Socratics, if you go back to the Egyptian and the Greek magicians, people like Empedocles and Parmenides and so on, they were empiricists. So science begins there with those people, and they were always that way. It was experience comes first, the description comes after, and then they would collate tables like 777.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Put the associations together, and it was always they were well known for being people concerned with empiricism versus metaphysics. That's
great. Yeah, it's like I definitely I've really kind of at this point in my life, and part of this might be being in California for so long, but I don't think that's it. At this point, what the fuck was I just gonna say? God damn it! Sorry, Alan. I'm a huge stoner, also. My complete lack. I am deeply unenlightened, by the way. I literally am just. I only play PlayStation. I'm not even joking. I'm not joking. I'm really out of practice. Fuck, what I gotta say? God damn.
Empiricism. You saying no?
I'm transmitting silence. the speech in the silence.
The ultimate teaching.
I am Hippocrates incarnate on the wings of an angel.
What did you do to your wrist? Is that PlayStation?
I messed up my hand. I messed my finger up. So, what the fuck were we talking about? What do you think of Crowley now?
Well, actually, okay, I'll join the two things together, the two threads.
Okay, right. All right.
We started off by talking about how I kept changing my brand, so to speak, or how I was describing myself, like that, right? So all the magic stuff sort of fell away because I was walking Crowley's footsteps. So I was doing the Baptist head, Holy Guardian Angel stuff, that kind of a thing. Enochian ethers. Discovering that there was a living spiritual tradition behind the institution, so to speak, that you could get initiated into. So the stuff with the grades for the AA, for me and Duncan doing that work was coming through the Enochian visionary stuff. It wasn't from some external.
Wait. What do you mean by that? So you were doing Enochian and then you transitioned into doing AA type work?
Well, the reason, so I did. I had a mentor in the IoT who said, you should do HGA stuff, Holy Guardian Angel stuff, right? So I thought of it completely in terms of evoking my future magical self purely for magical prowess, magical power, right? It was that simple. Right. So
power.
Yeah. Was that that's what I was interested in. How does magic work? And how do you do more of it? And what's possible? That kind of a thing.
Yeah.
So I'd already had an education in Crowley when I was a teenager. As soon as when I got to the age of 16, I moved out of my mother's house into a dive, took way too many drugs, just read Crowley for about 2 years, had a bit of an education, practiced chaos magic, stuff like that. Did all kinds of crazy stuff up until I was like 25, never told anyone, just kept it to myself because I couldn't explain it to anyone. 25, joined the IoT. It's like, right, now I'm with other magicians. Like, what can we do with this and where does it go and what's really going on? I met people there as well who they were happy where they were at. And that's fine. I understand that some people, they make peace with where they're at and they're getting what they're looking for. That's fine. But I was still like, the experience comes first, like a good empiricist, like that's going to come first and then we can understand it after.
Yeah.
Right. So I did the HGA thing. Had contact with my angel. What the vision that I had from my angel has only just come to full fruition, like over the last couple of years.
Wow.
So when was that? 2005, 2006? I forget the date. So almost 20 years, something like that. Obviously, I thought I understood it at the time, and yeah. But anyway, I was following a thread, and so I did the HGA thing. Then at some point we did the Enochian ethers. When I scribed the 30th Enochian ether, the content of the vision was that I was then taken to the 14th ether in the 30th one. And so I reported the vision. I was doing it with Dung, we recorded it and then I explored it. And it's like, what's the 14th ether? So I looked up the title of the 14th ether from the vision and the voice, and it was the reception of a master of the temple. Right. So that's what I mean. Like the whole crossing the abyss thing, those grades beyond the abyss, that stuff. It's like, oh, there's some kind of thread here, and it's got nothing to do with a human institution with grades where you have exams and you do these whatever. It's like you do this angel stuff, and then you're going in a direction, whether you want to or not. So that's what I mean. There's an inversion that happens at that point where suddenly it flipped for me, and I'm well. I mean, this is the way it is for anyone who gets to this point. Suddenly you're not at the top of the pecking order. Suddenly magic isn't a stepping stone to your fulfillment, right? So suddenly,
Right.
solving your problems isn't the bridge to get to where you want to be to your happiness. Instead, magic or the angel stuff, or all this other stuff, everything about you becomes a stepping stone to that. All of your problems become a stepping stone to that. All of your magic, all of your realization, all of this stuff. Right, it's completely the opposite way around, and then that can be surprising because then suddenly it's like I'm now going somewhere I've said yes to, but look where it's taking me, and the place where it's going to take you is it's going to there's different ways of describing it, and you find it in lots of traditions, but it's a process of being taken apart piece by piece, dismemberment, we could put it that way. And then you're crossing this thing called the abyss. So the stuff started coming through the Enochian system, right? So I'm starting having these visions. Duncan was having his own visions, but always we were following the experience and then seeing where it fit in different traditions, and it was that way around. So right. So anyway, we ended up on a whim. I decided to try and contact the Great White Brotherhood. I thought Crowley did it. Why hasn't anyone else ever tried it? The angel thing seems to be real, so I'll try that. So we spoke to a representative of the Great White Brotherhood, someone called Tempe. He gave us a number of prophecies. We messed up the working with our occult bullshit. We didn't understand what he was talking about.
Are you talking about this was an entity in the Enochian sessions? Okay.
No, not Enochian, sorry. This was just a separate magical working.
Okay. Okay.
Duncan has a talent for scrying, so I'd be the operator. He'd be the scrying.
Okay, cool.
We'll have a little chat. We did 3 workings in total, and I was even given longitude and latitude for where I'd have my awakening in India.
Wow.
So time went on, and then I ended up going traveling, and I ended up meeting someone that was part of this visionary thing, the prophecy thing. It was our Arunachal Ramana, this guru. And tracking it with stages from different traditions, that kind of a thing. Right. So then all the magic fell away. My preoccupation with presenting it as magic or thelema or these kinds of things fell away. Right. So then I spent 10 years. The process continued. Right. So the more awakenings would happen further down the line, far more miraculous with crazy content. I think this is why teachers don't talk about this stuff as well, because there's more.
Yeah, it just
You read the literature and it's sanitized. They talk about non-duality as if it's like this amorphous field of consciousness, and that's it. Meanwhile, they're remembering past lives. They're having visions of gods. There's all kinds of stuff that they.
Oh, interesting. Okay, what traditions did you have that experience with?
Sorry, with what?
Of non-dual traditions having sanitized public faces, but being wild behind the scenes.
But I'll just give one example briefly. So there's a teacher called Adyashanti.
Yeah.
You've heard of that guy?
Yeah.
For a long time, he was sort of trapped in the radical non-dual thing where you can't say I, you can't talk about your awakening, because it's like, if you've got an awakening, then, it's happened to you, then it hasn't happened, because you can't be there to have it. So, right. So he was sort of trapped there, and he talked about his awakening, talked about that for a long time. And then slowly but surely started to be a bit more honest about things. And then he started to talk about how during one of his awakenings, he remembered all of his past lives. One where he drowned, he fell off a boat and he drowned, and it was like this awakening was burning up the karma from these other past lives.
Yeah.
But that's just one example. But it gets sanitized. I mean, we can have our brain, and our non-threatening, impersonal, neutral, amorphous blob of consciousness, where we're all one, and that's it.
Yay! Yeah.
So,
that's interesting. Yeah, I haven't. Not like non-dual teachers. Like I definitely get it. Like I like it, but in practice, people are real arrogant.
Oh man, yeah. Well, that's it. It's an irony, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. So, because here's the thing, you see, if none of that stuff matters, why talking that way? Why? If there's no one there, why are you bothered if you say I or my awakening?
Right. Well, there's also, it's like there's a real easy way to like get out of yourself, and that's focusing on people that aren't you. Like actually going out and like helping in the community and that type of thing. It's like you get to the point where the most basic things of religion turn out to be sometimes the most profound in my opinion. And one of the things is just like if you're sitting down obsessing about yourself or various states you're in, or whether you exist or not, it's like, well, like, okay, great, but you can easily get out of yourself by actually going out and doing some karma yoga, let's say, right? So to be technical.
Well, I saw during the Baptist Head days, there was the movement's still around. It was called Practical Dharma, and there was a guy called a friend, Daniel Ingram.
What happened to him?
Well, his story is interesting, but he just briefly for the listeners or watchers or whatever, he wrote a book called Mastering the Core Teachings of the Buddha.
Yeah, I remember.
Yeah, so he discovered it. So in Buddhism, he called it mushroom culture. When it comes to awakening or spiritual states or experiences, you're kept in the dark and fed a lot of shit. That's the mushroom. Yeah. So he don't want to be honest and talk about it. So he wrote this book, highly technical. He talks about things vibrating at certain hertz and that kind of a thing. He really went. So he kind of kickstarted this movement called Practical Dharma. It's like we're going to talk.
I remember.
Yeah, so there was some overlap. I mean, I knew some of the teachers in that movement. Met up with them, some of them a couple of times. I was the only one from the Western tradition, in that environment. But it was everyone was describing the same thing. Everyone was describing the same thing, but from different angles. I saw a lot of people suffering with that. People would learn, I can do meditation. I'll go through these stages, and then I'll experience these things. And you can put an extraordinary amount of suffering and pressure on yourself, obsessing about that. I saw a lot of that, a lot of casualties from.
Do you think that? Well, what did that look like? And do you think that there are certain approaches that produce that?
Yes. So again, it comes back to orientation. If all you have is the practical orientation, that's going to lead to it. If you think in terms of strategies, if it's I'll do X and then Y will happen.
Yeah.
You're fundamentally misunderstanding the nature of reality, because it doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
do the flip thing and say there is nothing that you need to do. You're already awake. That's just how it is, right? That's also a mistake.
Yeah.
Rather, you need to understand that there are two worlds. We can call them two worlds or two domains, and one is found through the other in the human being. And this is how you can have a human being who will go through a process of growth, experiencing events in time that have a beginning and an end. But what they encounter in the event has no beginning and has no end. And that's like this other world. And it's a mixture of these two things. All the old traditions talk about it in this way. Non-duality, right? What is the thing that's now non-dual? What's the duality? Like if you're going to skip the duality part, you're going to make a fundamental error. So you need to be a dualist first. What are the two things? You need to get experience of this other thing that appears to be absent. We might call it spiritual domain or whatever. And then at some point you'll realize it's always been the case that you've participated in it. However, a change has happened. And the change, you can call it illusory if you like, and you can say it's just a matter of time versus eternity, something like that. But it's how growth is possible for something that fundamentally in and of itself cannot change. So it's like adding something to eternity that you won't be able to do otherwise. And it's through memory. You could put it that way. It's through memory. Sorry to go off on a technical tangent. So
Alan, what is this shit? I'm only into magic because I want to throw fireballs out of my hands and get tattoos and piercings and get my some success for my industrial project, Satan's Testicles.
What is that?
My industrial band, Satan's Testicles. That's what I want out of spirituality. What is this?
Yes. Well, I used to want similar things, and then I said bit off more than I could chew. So anyway, so after the magic stuff fell away, I was still pursuing the same thread, but I didn't have the words for it, and I kept trying to put it into words, and I would get so far with it, and then I would think, this isn't it. This just isn't it. Part of that involved, invitations to the spiritual, lecture circuit.
Yeah.
I was doing lots of retreats, doing all different kinds of things. And it's like, this isn't it. I made an interactive online platform, gamified, to teach practice. And I had the research program that I mentioned.
Wow.
This was called Wiser by Design. I gave myself migraines building it. I built it with a friend of mine called Peter.
Okay. How'd that do? It was like an app?
Yes. It was. I looked at the mindfulness stuff and I was like, "This is terrible."
Yeah.
You can have something, more realistic. Talking about Daniel Ingram, right? His thing was, if you just teach people mindfulness, right, they're going to find themselves in territory they're not prepared for. You can have your world fall apart, And this is described in traditions, but it's not in a 6-week mindfulness course.
Well, yeah, it's also, but people go to the 10-day Vipassana courses here. I don't know if they do that there, which I love because I'd had 20 years of doing fucking Liber E. But if you have just a random person who's possibly detoxing off drugs, those stories all over the internet of people losing their nut. And it's like, well, you can't run a marathon. If you run a marathon without ever having run before, you're going to have a bad time. So I think that people don't realize how much of a serious thing that is.
Yes. Well, Daniel Ingram became so much of a threat to the mindfulness industry that they paid a Buddhist monk getting paid by the mindfulness industry, right? To debunk Daniel Ingram. So
what?
A website smearing him, these kinds of things.
Are you serious? So wait, who was doing this? The mindfulness industry is doing Scientology shit?
I can't remember the details.
Okay, we don't have to name alleged.
It's all alleged, right? So it's alleged. I mean, a Buddhist monk in robes took money to smear Daniel Ingram. So anyway,
that's dirty. That's dirty. He
decided that forget Buddhism then, and he started. I think it's called something like the Institute for Emergent Phenomena, but it's called this is the technical term. The scientific term they're using is emergent phenomena, and it's the purely scientific approach to non-duality.
Oh, okay,
that's the thing that he started, and that's his response. Yeah. He also does loads of magic. So,
okay.
Yeah. Anyway, so right, where was I? Yeah, so I was trying my best, like to try and put this stuff into words and understand what it was. I was teaching people, doing retreats, taking people through this process. And then it got to a point where it all fell apart. All of my best efforts turned out to be not up to it. And once all of that was exhausted, so let's say it took 10 years, during that period of time, I'd moved to Wales and I lived in the middle of nowhere. It's cold and damp and dark, a bit like a womb.
Okay.
I got married, I had kids, and then Tempe turned up. So one day, out of nowhere, Tempe, the representative of the Great White Brotherhood, turned up in a vision out of nowhere, made fun of me as he's wont to do, and then revealed that his real nature. So I thought I'll need to get the
By the way,
together.
that froze. You just said revealed that his real nature was, and then it completely froze and it was completely blank. So
You'll never know.
never know. Okay. Just calling that out.
Yeah, Ion. Revealed his real nature was the god Ion. And so I went and gate crashed a retreat Duncan was doing. He was doing a casino retreat. You stare at a candle for a certain amount of time. Then at the red image in your phosphene, people think it's on your retina, but it's the phosphene, isn't it? In your eyes. Anyway, whatever.
Yeah.
You focus on that. And then if you do that for 10 hours a day for 2 weeks, you'll have extraordinarily crazy images, like visions, stuff, like Duncan reported having reality tear open and some kind of spider Buddha creature, poked its head round and was like, But
that sounds like an awesome. I want that airbrushed on the side of a van. That's awesome.
It's like, what's the point of it though? I just couldn't.
It's cool because it's cool.
Well, that's why Duncan does it. Cause it's cool. So, anyway, I gate crashed his retreat, and we did. To cut a long story short, we spoke with Ion. I got a prophecy from Ion. Ion said, I have a secret I've not told anyone, and it's a dodecahedron, 12-sided object. Anyway, everything had fallen apart, and I ended up just on a whim doing a retreat in Greece with a small number of people. And on that retreat, I decided that, I'd realized I had nothing else to say. I tried my best. I had nothing to say, nothing to offer. If I just sat there and said nothing for the entire retreat in front of people, it just doesn't really matter. And then I delivered these 12 teachings. I'm a bit slow, so it was like halfway through, I realized, hang on a minute, there's going to be 12 teachings. There's 12 sides to this. Yes, and that became the book. That became the book Magia. The thing that I'd been looking for, I was incapable of creating it, and it was more miraculous than I could have guessed in terms of that teaching. And so that's what I've been teaching since then. But it's the same.
So what was that? What were those teachings? What was the gist of it?
Well, the stuff that I've already been talking about to a certain extent, it's the recognition of the right orientation that's required. And I'll segue around now to the name, to why it's called Magick, right? And it's an old word for magic, Magia. There's this distinction between doing practical magic for results, right, and mysticism, right? That despite what people say, that didn't exist in the ancient world. And if you keep tracing it back, you'll end up, the furthest you can go back will be an Egyptian creation myth, where the self-created God, creator God, whatever name we're going to use for it, because there was lots of different names and lots of different variations, and iterations of this myth. But along with that self-created God came Magick, or Heka, also self-created in the mouth of that God. That's where we get the idea of logos from. And that's magic, and it's words spoken. That's what logos means, words spoken. And the words spoken conjure creation into being. And that's what magic is. It's a primordial daemonic power, if you like, that the holy guardian angel is like an image for. And it's what we normally call magic, as provocative as this might be, is a parody. It's a parody.
I agree with you.
Right. So
I agree with you. It's the ape of thought.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
Magia is the first word, magic, right? It's an old word. The reason why that's in the teaching goes all the way back to my childhood, and it was confirmation of the word. It is my word in terms of a grade, specific grade within a certain order.
Mm-hmm.
The content of the teaching is what can I say? Extraordinarily old, but it's the rebirth of the old or the ancient in a new expression.
The old meaning what? The ancient world?
Yeah,
I'm doing gematria in my head. Hold on a second. Continue.
the ancient, yes, the primordially ancient.
So that's 55. That adds to 55. So mystic number of Malkuth, Magia.
I don't know your menu.
It adds to 55 in gematria, Magia.
Yeah,
which is the mystic number of Malkuth, and it is 11 times 5. So that's the great work of Magick times the 5 of the pentagram, or 5 of the pentagrammaton. Or what else could it be? 2 5s, two pentagrams, 2 5s, 2 pentagons. Interesting. Okay.
yeah. So the teaching, in some ways, it's the 12 teachings of the true earth. That's another way of putting it. But if no one was interested in any of the historic stuff, it is just contained in itself. But it is nevertheless the same thing that you'll find in alchemy, in Hermeticism, in Egyptian stuff, in Gnosticism. It starts off with the appreciation that there's something that comes first before everything else. The reason why anyone's interested in magic, or they even know what the word means, or they learn about these traditions, is because there's an impetus, a silent impetus that comes first before anything else. An organic movement, and we can think of our lives and our practice and our process as a way of putting that into words, a way of understanding ourselves and our place, if you like, in creation. But when we were kids, we didn't know the terms. We didn't have the language for it. We wouldn't have talked about awakening or any of these things, or the great work or magic or whatever. And yet, nevertheless, it will have. It's there. It comes first, and it comes with us.
Yeah.
Yeah. In the book, we talk about this as silent knowing, and it's a knowing in the sense that it's driving you to look for something, but you can't tell me what it is. You don't know what it is. You'll pick up language on the way, right? But you must to use the analogy of the beloved for understanding it. Another way of understanding it, which is you can only long for someone that you love if you've already known them, if you've already been in love with them.
Huh.
So you're already looking for something that's absent that you must have already known. And that's what drives you. So you can understand the nature of the divine as the beloved in that regard. But the silent knowing comes first. And therefore the orientation of any practice has to account for that fact. But what we tend to do, you see, in this world is invert that. We think appearance or words or these kinds of things comes first. And so I'm going to do this practice that I've learned from this tradition. Anything that or appear. And so you've got it back to front.
So you see it more as a recognition of something that's occurring, or how would you put that? I mean, so rituals. I mean, it sounds like you're suggesting it almost as a devotional practice.
Yeah.
Or did I misunderstand?
Yeah. No. There's 3 practices in Magia. 2 of them refer to the oldest way of thinking about the magical act. In the ancient world, you were either binding something or unbinding it, and there's no other magical act possible. You can either bind something or bind it. And obviously, there's a limited way of thinking about that, but I'm talking about it in a more universal, fundamental dynamic, right? So in unbinding practice, we use the structure of a tree, the tree of life, to understand the interplay of these 2 worlds that I've talked about, and how to orient yourself. Not to mistake anything on the tree as what it is that you're after, including the fruit of the practice, which we might call awakening or whatever, but to understand that we're the snake that travels up the tree. So with a god that goes, or the thing that's moving, right? So when I talked before about taking yourself to be thinking too much of yourself and also taking yourself to be less than you are.
Yeah.
Everything on this tree, understand that we're the thing that's going to travel beyond it all, and that's the point. And that the point actually of this awakening stuff, or even magic, is actually what we're doing when we go through this process of waking up. Is we are recapitulating cosmology. We are repeating the first day of creation. That might be another way of putting it, where we have a non-dual experience of a nature, let's say that's unbounded. We can talk about it having a clarity or unity, right? Everything participates in it, that kind of a thing. That's just a very old understanding of the nature of the soul. But what you've done is you've started with this world, you have an awakening, and it's like the addition of an extra layer or something like that on an onion, right? It's an addition of an extra thing. It's like, okay. Now you can think about that in terms of you. I've had an awakening, and this is for me, and this is for my fulfillment, right?
Mm-hmm.
But at some point, you're going to recognize that nature that people stop at and think it's non-duality has an origin, has a source. It's even vaster and more profound, and it's terrifying. The shadow of that is terrifying. But if you travel through that shadow and realize its nature, it's the source of all awakenings, right? And then you can even go beyond that. So it's the one as not even as a source, but just as one. And then from there, we then proceed into creation itself. And so the point of the practice is to complete the circle of creation. And the orientation there then is that this isn't for you at all. It was never about you in the first place. It's not even about helping people or any of that stuff. One way of putting it might be you're taking care of the gods, or serving the gods, or serving the divine, or something like this. But past that first stage, certainly by the time you get to the second stage, that's where you can't hold on to the usual beliefs that we have, because things get too profound and too miraculous.
In what way?
Well, I'll give you an example. The second step, this source, returning to the source, in some traditions in the literature, you'll hear it described as this is the most apt place to use this phrase, so it gets used in lots of different other places, is to die whilst you're still alive. Now that can actually involve, when someone has that realization, meeting people that have died, because it's another way of saying you're actually in that place where you are when you're dead. This is too, we're already stretching the bounds of what's possible. What you might think is what can fit within a secular material.
This is the Ultraculture Podcast, Alan. Carry on.
Well, let's just say beyond that.
I'll put my hood on here. I'll put my hood on, and then we can talk about non-secular matters.
Beyond that, there are things like talking birds. I don't mean visions of birds. I mean, actual birds. Filthy, dirty, like earth birds. Those birds, they're the messengers from the true earth. And the language of the bird is a real thing.
Okay.
Yeah. So I already know I've crossed the line. And I know that there are people who are into magic, and they'll hear what I've just said, and they'll think that I've gone too far, that I'm saying things that are too. I've lost my mind. I've gone crazy.
I'm only interested if it can help with the success of Satan's testicles. But no, I'm only laughing because of I don't know if I should mention this on your podcast. Your thing about the Occulture conference was fucking hilarious. God, I hate those things so much. Sorry. Okay.
Well, I mean, that was another example of part of completing the circle of creation.
Okay.
I was told to go there in the same way that I was told to start the AA lineage, to use a thing that I picked up. What I saw at the Occulture Festival thing, what conference, was awful. Like, my God, I can't begin to tell you how angry I was.
Okay.
I was on the way home from that place. I was swearing to myself that I was going to destroy everyone involved. That I would make it my life's work. And the reason why I was so angry the reason I was so angry is because they're throwing the younger generation under the bus into the meat grinder.
How
Right?
so?
I saw things there, man. But I had to realize that the reason that I'd gone there and I'd done what I'd done, I didn't understand it. And whatever had to be done was done and has been done. Same with the order thing, with the A lineage. At the time, I thought, why would I want to start that? I don't want to have anything to do with occultists or Thelemite.
You've seen the Holy Mountain, right?
Yeah.
You know the Pantheon bar?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that's a culture.
Right.
But I'm ridiculous, so I was just like, fuck it. I'm just gonna hang out here anyways on the way back down. It's kind of fun.
Yeah.
But I think sometimes you kind of need you kind of do it's my take on that, for whatever it's worth, is that sounds like a shit show, which is why you need an actual representative of the tradition at least lurking there. Because even if it was a shit show, you don't know who all the attendees were, and you don't know who listened to you and what they took from it and why it was important. Or you could go flat out to say it's like, well, without you there or somebody like that, it's completely lost. It's complete, because now there's no link to any tradition at all. It's just Cliffoth, right?
Yeah. I was surprised when I was there and I did my talk. It was at the same time as Stephen Skinner was doing his talk.
Oh, okay.
Another room, probably murdering Crowley. I've got to come back around to that question you asked. What I think.
Yeah. No, I'm curious about that. Yeah, I like his stuff.
Yeah, but it was surprising. The room was full. There was someone who traveled 8 hours just to come to the talk. And then I got interviewed by someone. There just happened to be a documentary crew who wanted to interview me, and she took me to the venue to be interviewed, and she picked the temple of the nameless god that was in the bowels of the place. And I don't know if you've seen the video, some of my YouTube channel. Yeah, and she interviewed me there, which was interesting. And I got to tell the truth in the temple of the nameless god, that they'd opened the conference by invoking that god,
the nameless god.
The nameless god, yeah. And you might as well, in Magia speak, you could think of that as the shadow of God, or the opposite of what Ion is.
Okay.
So, because it's this funny thing, it's like, are they genuinely worshipping this entity? And it's some of them consciously opened the conference with this deity, and anyway. So Crowley, right? So in my mind, all I've done is the same thing. I've followed the same thread the entire time. And I know people might think me constantly, building these things and then getting rid of them, which I did over that 10-year period, like 5 years ago or whatever. They might see that as, what can I say, indecision on my part, or fickleness, or, being...
I saw it as a tactic to avoid parasites. And I saw it as self-preservation on your side. So,
well, it probably functioned in that capacity. Yeah. But anyway, I was actually following the same thing. And there were places I could have stopped along the way, but I kept thinking this. I knew that it wasn't it deep down. It's like the silent knowing. I knew it wasn't it. So that's all I've been doing. Now, that thing that I've been following is the same thing that Crowley followed. I can't deny that I have a deep personal connection with Crowley that goes back into when I was even younger, like 9-year-old in the playground, if that's when I first came across him. And he came and he appeared in a book of ghost stories just at the time when I'd realized that only Jesus Christ could know the nature of God. Saints didn't exist anymore. Right, I'd just come across the fantasy idea of wizards, and I thought, oh, they're similar. Like, because I want to know that nature, and it seems weird that there's only one person who could have known that nature. And then Crowley appears in this book of ghost stories, and I realized, and it was as bad an introduction as you could hope for. It was like crucified cats. It got the story slightly wrong, So it was like crucifying cats, torturing children, or murdering them, or whatever.
Yeah.
And I thought, oh, it's real. Or at least some adults believe this to be real.
Right.
Maybe it's real.
Is
Maybe
that a good thing is another question, but yes.
Well, I knew I'd found what I was looking for, even though the appearance was as dissuasive as it could be. And this is somewhat.
That's something about Crowley that's something that he figured out in terms of leaving his legacy, where it's like, like I made the point to Tobias Churton, like if Crowley hadn't turned himself into this nightmarish, scandalous figure, no one would remember him. It's like, how many people know how many people do you ever hear talk about Paul Foster Case, right? Like none, right? Contemporary of Crowley.
But if you compare the material, I mean, there's a
well, there's also that there's a bit of a jump, but he was his interesting strategy, if that was a strategy, or maybe.
Well, I'm currently I was so late last year. My publisher who published Advanced Magic for Beginners back in the day, and who has just published, might as well plug it, the Baptist Head compendium, Aeon Books. Oliver from Aeon, he asked me, he said, "Oh, Crowley's copyright stuff, it was now out of copyright. Would you want to edit one of his books? Do you want to do a Crowley project?" And I said, I'll do the entire collected magical works. And I'll write introductory essays to those works. Because what can I say? This is going to sound stupid, but I don't think his story has been told by any of the biographers. I don't know if I've had reason recently to have to read all of the material written about him, most of the stuff that he's written, all of the research stuff. When you read it back to back, it's very it's interesting what biographers focus on and what they ignore.
What do you mean? I want to dig into this. What do you mean specifically?
If I ask most people after they've read one of the biographies, like what his trajectory was, like how magic unfolded in his life, they won't be able to tell me, or they can't tell me, or they have a mixed idea about what it is. I don't want to say too much because I don't want to ruin it, right?
Okay.
But it's things like when he went to the Golden Dawn, and he got two things immediately. He got trained in astral projection, astral travel, right? Immediately from the get-go, from Baker and Jones, and which he was a natural at. This is before like being initiated and going through the grades. He learns how to do that stuff. He gets immediately introduced to the sacred magic of Abramelin the Mage, just translated by Mathers, right? It wasn't part of the curriculum. He gets that stuff. The greatest magician in the Golden Dawn, Alan Bennett, moves into his house, right, to train him, to teach him.
Yeah.
He gets a ritual from Bennett, the famous Bornless ritual. All of this stuff. It's like what can I say? There is a thread that runs from the moment he becomes conscious to him ending up in the Golden Dawn and going past it, and even in terms of the reception of the Book of the Law, and then what he does with the rest of his life. There's a thread there that isn't that hasn't been described. That I think is the story of his life and what's really going on. I mean, you can talk about him being wholly dissuasive. I mean, he is the taboo. Yeah. You shouldn't study him. You shouldn't pay attention to this. He is the taboo.
Yeah.
Everything that he does, he brings on himself.
Yeah. Yeah.
But interestingly, this is the interesting thing. The accusations are always slightly wrong. It's like he's innocent of the accusation, but he brought it on himself. That's very curious.
Well, yeah, I mean, I talked about this in the John Dee book too. I mean, it's like all of the media stuff is ridiculous, but then you read his diaries and it's like, okay, it's a bit of the first there's a mountain, then there's no mountain, then there's a mountain, or vice versa, or whatever it is, where it's like, Yeah, no, there actually is a pretty pathological individual under there. But we
Yeah.
have but he's been, it's like somebody asked Jodorowsky about Crowley. This was maybe 10, 15 years ago, and he was like, so what do you think about Crowley? And he's like, Crowley's a man dead. He's
Is
been
he?
dead 75 years. So like, but Freud was horrible, and arguably, by throwing women under the bus, did tremendous damage to civilization. But we have psychology now, and you can't not study Freud.
Yeah.
Anyway.
The thing is, I would say Freud is dead. I don't think Crowley is.
Okay.
I once said on a Warp FM on a podcast episode talking to Duncan, we were talking about this like post Crowley Thelema kind of thing. That sort.
Yeah. What's up with that? They're like trying to write him out of it, and
it was something like that. But I quit. Like we need less Thelema and more Crowley, right? But what I meant by that was what is he doing and what is happening. So it's like the thing you mentioned in your book, right? It's like he brings it on himself. It's like the stuff that he wrote in that poetry.
Yeah,
it's like, well, he may as well be guilty of it from what he wrote. However, his child probably died because of the mystery of disgust. Do you know about that? So the conditions at the abbey were filthy.
Yeah.
And right, so it's like he's innocent of the accusation, but he brought it on himself.
Basically it's like true because he's doing this stuff on the deeper level. People can feel it probably, and it's the truth in the spirit, not the letter.
But here's the thing. So the question would be, what is it that's driving him to do that?
Okay.
The book is just the same. You read the book of the law, it's intentionally dissuasive, is it not?
Yeah.
And there's a lot of bullshit about Crowley being what can I say? When he does his thing, which comes across as compensatory talk for like being the greatest living poet,
right,
prophet of the air, and all this stuff, and it's like he's boasting and arrogant and all this other stuff. He's doing what he's told to do in the book. The book tells him to do that, and it tells him to do that because he has to look a certain way, right? He has to be dressed up in a certain way and presented in a certain way. And I don't mean this in a superficial sense. I mean,
I know.
I mean in an essential sense for him. It's like he's driven to bring this stuff on himself to appear this way, and he struggles with that all of the time. When he mostly does the compensatory talk, it's when everything, like he's in the most damned situation he could possibly be in, and he can't get out. He can't move left or right. He's held in place, and he has to move in a certain direction. Now he said yes to that, but that's where he finds himself, and the book describes all of this. So the question would be, what is that? And so when I say, I know I'm kind of not giving everything that I think, but when I say I don't think Crowley's dead, that's what I mean. I mean, there was something more fundamental going on there, that is still alive now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I will.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
No, I would say it's more important to understand that. If you want to understand what Thelema is, it's that. And it's like, so what is it? And I don't think anyone's engaged with that or described it.
I agree.
Like the biographies are either, silly tabloid stuff. They don't like him and whatever, or they're gushing.
Right, which is also, which is also.
Yeah, he's not guilty, but he brought it on himself.
I think that's an interesting take on it. What do you think about his? Go ahead.
But I was just going to say this will make a lot more sense, I think, when I've I'm just finishing up the introductory essay for the first book that I'm going to do in that collection, which is Magic Without Tears. When that's going to come out this autumn, it will make most of what I'm saying now, I think, will make more sense once I publish that.
Okay. Well, I think that one thing that we share in common, and I'd love to talk more off the record, is approaching that material with a chaos magic background, meaning trying to operationalize it. And I don't think that I think that's something both of us have done in our own way. And I think that certainly the biographers have not done that. Like, no one's written like the magical biography of Crowley as a magician, right? Because you need you not only do you need a magician to do that, but you need a magician at his level to do it. And you need somebody who can write a book and communicate and then get it published. That's a pretty heavy task, you know? So, but it's kind of like with John Dee. It's like, I had the similar frustration where it was just like, fuck, well, I've read all the biographies and no one can tell me what he was talking about. Because those worlds wouldn't cross, the academic study and the magic study, and the academics hate magic and the magicians don't have academic or scientific rigor. So usually, but what do you think about Crowley's state of consciousness? I mean, where do you think he really was?
All the way. It's astonishing to me, you know, you can talk about Crowley with his inflammatory, compensatory pronouncements. It's astonishing how biographers, critics, academics are willing to do exactly the same thing, right, in a domain they know nothing about.
Yeah.
And the most important thing, the only reason we talk about him. So I'll addressing all of the material.
That's really interesting. I'm looking forward to that. I'm really curious what you have to say about him, because I think you're right. And what is that? It's like the Dunning-Kruger effect or something like that, where about the expertise of journalists, where whenever they talk about they talk about your field, they come across as being completely unresearched, but you assume that they're well researched in all the other fields when they're probably just the same. Yeah, I mean, there's been so much written about Crowley and so much written by Crowley, and there have been attempts to kind of operationalize his stuff. I mean, I think Lon Duquette's stuff is great for just putting all the stuff together so that you can do it. But in terms of like advancing the core, I mean, a list of the rituals is not going to give you the core. Is not going to give you the context at all. And you've got like Kenneth Grant if you want to go just get some Louv and just like go for it. But like but I think that Kenneth Grant is another one of those people who was deliberately obfuscating or off-putting.
I think Crowley summed him up in that letter, the famous letter, to a T, and he never deviated from it.
What?
He never deviated from it. So
wait, what do you mean specifically?
So the line in the letter that Crowley wrote to him, which was, he can't help going off into fantasy. Like,
he couldn't, but he had, but particularly I don't know how much I want to talk about it, but there's there's good stuff in there too, I think, if you know how to look, but you just clearly don't think so. Okay, that's fine.
Crowley died. His work died when he died, and it's been dead. And
interesting, arguable, but you could make an argument, definitely.
I know that's what can we say? Provocative and probably pretentious statement, but I've come to that conclusion. I used to think.
Well, yeah, just my final point about anime. Yeah, my final point about Kenneth Grant is like, it's basically, if you read it as somebody who knows Crowley, but they're writing their own, like they're doing like their own hentai comic book about Crowley because they're obsessed with him. They know all this stuff, but this is like their hentai that they're doing.
I mean, listen, like just on that topic, like bringing in like the great old ones.
Yeah,
like that kind of a thing. listen, there are things involved with magic that are far more terrifying than anything H.P. Lovecraft described. Way more terrifying.
Okay, like describe it.
Well, I'll just say this: why would someone erect a barrier like that? To talk about, I don't know, sexual fluids, the great old ones. Why would he do that? Why is he doing that? What's over the horizon? Do you know what I mean? I know that that's not the what Crowley was grappling with is far more terrifying.
Okay.
Did Grant read the Book of the Law?
I take it that's a rhetorical question.
Well, it's not very long. You can read it. Are you going to tell me anything like H.P. Lovecraft wrote anything that's more terrifying than
Right. Yeah, I always assumed that the Lovecraft stuff was Twilight language, but who knows? It could also just be hentai.
Well, yeah. So,
but when you talk about Crowley grappling with something far more terrifying, what do you mean?
Well, I mean in that regard, I mean okay, let's put it this way. Life, the entirety of what's happening, right, is determined by, we're in the grip of unconscious forces, right, that determine everything. And the only real choice humans have is whether they consciously say yes to that, right, or they say no. And to the extent they say no, life is just random and chaotic, and they're at the mercy of those forces. Frequently, those forces erupt in our society, and you see it happen. And people are radically. But this isn't me. This isn't just me saying this. This goes back as far back as you want to go, with all the teachers in all the traditions. People are just radically asleep. Radically asleep, and it should terrify you to your marrow to understand how these forces can move people and what they end up doing. Like I mean, it's happening. You should be able to think of some examples now from contemporary culture, but it happens all the time. And we haven't even begun to understand that situation.
Are you talking about, like, let's say, for instance, whatever that was that went through the world that produced Trump and Brexit and all of that? As just one example, or are you talking about groups or specific mimetic things? Or,
I mean, it could be examples of that, but we just lived through the greatest biomedical disaster in history, with arguably the greatest global governmental failure of all time. If you can pay attention, you can see what happened in the world, and how 1 minute on the surface people can profess to believe in certain things, and then at the drop of a hat they can even notice it themselves, the change, how peculiar it is, but suddenly everything's moving in a completely different direction.
Yeah,
and we're like flotsam on a current in a sea that's changed direction.
this is, I suppose, what people were trying to understand with astrology, and whether you can or not, I don't know, but I assume that's at least in the ancients, attempting to say the planets or stars were at cause for that stuff.
But I find, see, you can understand this stuff and read about it, and Jung is great for this. Read about Carl Jung.
Okay.
We were just talking about Crowley. Do you think he understood himself? It gripped him soon as he thought at the age of 11 at his father's funeral, right? He didn't even know why he turned to the devil's side. No idea. Anyway, you can understand this stuff, but like when you start to, it was around about that time with lockdown and that kind of a thing that I really appreciated seeing the change. and it should be alarming. It should be terrifying. We can profess we want to certain positions and what we think we would do in certain situations, but we're in the grips of things that are more terrifying than great old ones, than Cthulhu.
And so are you talking about, you're essentially talking about the manifestation of the Aeon and the forces of the Book of Law and all of that?
I mean, that's another. Well, I'll add that on top. I'll add that on top because if we don't understand how to be conscious of these things that come up, that erupt in civilization and culture, if we don't understand how to navigate those things, then we're lost.
Yeah,
right.
That's a very practical point that I think people have been struggling to articulate.
Yeah, and you see this. You'll see this. Sometimes something will come along, like a wave will come along. Some people are fine. They see and they say, "This is madness. What are people doing? This is madness." But the next wave gets them.
Yeah.
Suddenly, that person who was next to you was saying a moment ago is now saying the most things. Right. So
I'm sure you've seen Invasion of the Body Snatchers.
Yes. Yeah. So there is that. I mean, with the Book of the Law, I mean, it's very clear. There is a description of the nature of reality, which is what the law is, the divine law. Just tells you the consequences. You can either do this one thing here, right? But if you don't do that, this is the horror that will result from it.
Yeah, I think that I basically think that Crowley was right, or rather that the Book of the Law is correct. And why that is, fuck knows. But if you do what it says, it is the path through the carnage, it seems.
But the other factor that's also terrifying, I'll keep this on as well, is it's one thing to understand that we each individually have a choice to say yes to something, to following something else other than appearances, to be conscious through what we're moving through and paying attention. But then there's also appreciating the number of people that do that. And we can talk about what society can be, or culture could be, or civilization might be. And there is all this talk about a new civilization and all this, a great awakening.
Great changes are occurring on the earth plane, Alan.
Right.
Now is the time to awaken to your true power.
But I'm afraid to say, when presented with a choice, most people have made a different one. We see it, we keep seeing it on repeat. Something comes up, a choice comes up. And it's also what is it? It's also very curious, isn't it, how that happens? If you pay attention, you can see.
I know what you mean, because I've been through it, obviously, just like everyone else in the last several years. And it's, I had to, at one point, I nailed an index card to my my view out my window, and it was just a list of all the things that seemed like they were an apocalypse in the last 5 years, where things are kind of okay on the other side, just to remind myself not to consistently freak out, that these things have come and gone as well. And it's, of course, very tempting. What people need to understand, they need to have a story. And so it's very tempting for people to come up with, religious stories or I don't know, explanations for why these things are happening. But I think you've made a very practical point, which is, for whatever reason, they are happening, and they're happening at greater frequency, and they're quite likely to continue happening. And God forbid war escalates. And
these are the eruptions that I'm talking about.
Yeah.
You could look for motifs and say this has a structure to it.
Yeah, and it is the Lord of Force and Fire. There is, and the question, I think Crowley says at one point, it's either going to lead to an age of enlightenment or a new dark age, and it's looking like the latter these days. So,
I think that's probably, I'm sad to say, probably what we can expect, because we didn't, culturally, civilizationally, we didn't carry over what we were supposed to from the old one. We were supposed to preserve Christian virtues and values.
You think so?
Oh, for sure. Through what's happened, but we gave that up like 3 centuries ago. So what we were supposed to carry through, we didn't.
What do you mean by that? I'm curious. You're not even talking about nature or something like that. Like, what do you mean by that?
What do I mean by that? I mean, okay, well, look around and ask yourself, where do I see forgiveness?
Yeah,
When was
nowhere.
the last time you saw forgiveness?
Yeah, it's like I always make the point. It's like the social justice is all it's like all the nosing, all the hating your neighbor of Christianity without any of the forgiveness.
Well, I mean, it's a trite thing to say now, but it's
Yeah, it
secular
is what it is.
Protestantism, Jesus Christ, Protestantism. That's what that's where we are. We can't escape the end of the Christian era.
Okay. So we're talking about the Protestant Reformation. Okay.
So I mean, like
Okay.
the what passes for politics of either description is Protestantism, but
Yeah.
it's secularized. It's been stripped of anything of any virtue or
Yeah. So
spirituality.
they've taken all the good stuff out, all the pressure. They've taken all the pressure releases out, which is Christianity, as fire and brimstone as it is at the end of the day also about forgiveness and community. And neither of those things are present in whatever this thing we're in currently is.
I mean, it was but more than that as well. There was a call to sacrificing yourself to yourself to like to uh recognizing that the burdens of the world can be found in yourself,
Okay.
and that you can travel through that on behalf of the world even.
Yeah, I suppose that would be a much more Catholic understanding. And it is interesting. I live near New Orleans now. I visit and seeing the difference in, I grew up in the white Protestant suburbs, Southern California. So, it's pretty sterile. But, seeing New Orleans, it's like seeing an actual Catholic, it's a city, essentially. It's completely different. It's kind of a mess. People are trashed nonstop, but there's a different spirit there, and not always a good one. But there is a sense of
I
people
mean, I
with
don't want you to,
souls.
I don't want to, I don't want you to get me wrong. Those, it's not even in those communities.
Okay, okay.
I don't mean, like we need to return and become real Christians or whatever. It's like it's far too late.
No. I'm sorry. Don't get me wrong. I'm not making like a traditionalist point or something. I'm not suggesting those traditions still have it. I'm kind of just suggesting the type of person that comes through those ideological structures, like what it tends to produce in terms of the actual lives of the lay congregation is a lot more chill on the Catholic side, other than some very, very prevalent issues in the church. But
Yeah, there's an interesting thing in the Equinox of the Gods, right? That Crowley wrote in his atrocious material, right? Which is he wrote his worst stuff when ever dealing with the Book of the Law.
you think
It's why,
so?
why book 4 sucks. It's why it's
I like book 4.
possible.
I like book 4. Wait. Why do you think book 4 sucks? I'm curious.
He's doing that thing where if you account for all the details, it's like you're dealing with the real thing, right? So he's got all the formulas.
Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah.
And it's like you're not even talking about it.
Hmm.
You are. I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying. Look, I wouldn't have wanted his task. I wouldn't have wanted to do that.
Right. Well, I think with
The Book of the Law and being told, right, go and tell people about this. Go and promote this.
yeah, yeah, yeah. It's pretty ridiculous. Yeah, I think with my perspective of, I don't know, maybe you've had this experience. Every time I read Crowley's books, they're different. I swear, those things change on the shelf overnight somehow, like in a Disney movie. I don't know how, but
It should.
whatever his level of skill in writing was, which is phenomenal, actually.
Oh yeah.
There's so many layers. Like every time I've gone back to it it's different, and it's different because it's a different period of my life, and I have more experience, and I'm more of an adult person rather than a teenager reading Crowley. It's like when you read Crowley as an adult, it's a lot different, and you hopefully can understand more of the context of some of like the cultural things he's talking about and so forth. Because you basically need to have, there's a really high bar on even being able to understand him based on like knowing what he knows and then knowing Kabbalah and all, even being able to decipher the codes and all, and then the history and yeah. So,
I was just going to say, in the Equinox of the Gods, there is a funny passage in there which I've never heard anyone, which is in that book, and it's the book where he's presenting the Book of the Law to the world, right? He says this was the original teaching of the Christians, the Christian Gnostics.
Wait, he says that. Where does he say that?
In the Equinox of the Gods.
I missed that.
Yeah. Oh, it's there.
And you think he's taking the piss?
No. He's saying the content of the Book of the Law. This would have been the original teaching of Gnostic Christians, the first Christians, but it was destroyed by the church. Which you can argue. And, yeah, I think that's I would agree with that.
So what makes you agree with that?
I mean, I've been shown in visions what happened to the thread across the span of 2,000 years. The most horrific thing I've ever experienced was a depiction of what happened in 2,000 years. I was shown what happened from the Gnostics to now. They were stamped out. They were mercilessly stamped out, the Gnostics. They were, yeah. I don't agree with Crowley that Jesus didn't exist. I mean, he went so far to say that, but he believed that the Gnostics were real people.
Yeah.
And the Book of the Law was the original teaching.
That's wild.
Yes. Now there is something interesting about the idea of that as a there's a continuity. There's continuity, and the thread. It looks like it was blotted out, but it went underground.
Well, you can, I guess, make a connection of. I mean, when was the 25th? The 25th dynasty is when the Stele Revealing is from, so that was pre-Christ, but I don't remember how long prior. And
it was about 600 BC.
1600.
600.
600. Okay, so even prior to Mahayana and prior to Buddhism, then, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so like 100 years prior to Buddhism, something like that. And then, and you've got that stele is essentially, potentially could be read as at least a condensed teaching of the 25th dynasty, the final dynasty. And then you have all the New Age stuff about Jesus going to India and Egypt and all that. Yeah, I don't know. Who knows? I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe. I mean, you got Kenneth Grant talks about it being the Typhonian tradition from ye olden days.
Yeah, I mean, my. By the way, talking about Kenneth Grant, the reason I have some context for my opinion of Grant is based on my experience with Lamb.
Okay.
I'm going to Typhonian order working to do with Lamb and the identity of Lamb.
Okay. So what happened there?
So, I mean, I wrote this up, and it was an article that was published in the Fortean Times in their Crowley special.
I think I read this on Baptist Head, but I don't remember it at all. So
yeah, but no one cared.
No, I think I remember reading that when it came out, but I don't remember what was in it now.
Well, when I was at the, I went to this working. It was run by Michael Staley.
Okay.
And nice chap, but he didn't like my article. We did this working, and it was a sadhana, like a Kundalini sadhana thing, but the serpent going up your spine that you were visualizing.
Oh yeah, that's when they put that out in a Starfire issue, I think.
Right, and it had the head of Lamb.
Yeah.
Anyway, we did the working. When it got to my Ajna chakra, I saw an old Chinese guy in a robe that was slightly too big for him. He was very pleased with himself. He was very happy. And I knew over to the right was a monastery or a temple or something like that. And it was in a forest. And it's the clearest thing I've ever seen, right? Like a memory, right? Anyway, so that popped up. And I thought, that's curious. So I mentioned this, during the working. And that was the end of it. Then one day I was looking at the image of Lamb, and it's the frontispiece to The Voice of the Silence, right? Yeah. The Voice of the Silence is a book that Crowley, written by Blavatsky, that Crowley thinks is her best work. And he does this commentary, and he wrote that on Esopus Island. When it was on Esopus Island. And he has this image that he's drawn, and he puts it there. Right, and there's now the image no one notices, but the image in the if you see the full image, so it's not cropped, you'll see in the corner the number 49. Right. So I just thought 49. I'll see what because the lines in the book the paragraphs in the book are numbered. So I thought I'll go to 49. So I look at 49, and lo and behold, it says, it talks about the path and the way, and becoming the way, right? And there's stuff underneath the lamb drawing that talks about this. He's not even called lamb, it's llama, right? But whatever, Kenneth. Right. And it's like, oh, look. And then he references East Island. Now, in his confessions, I read the section about him being on East Island where he has the most profound realization he's ever had. And he talks about how he could put it into a few words, but people wouldn't get it. But he talks about how he put it into a few words 13 years ago, something like that. So I found out what book that was, and it's described in the confessions. It's in the same document, because he's referencing something he's writing at the time. So you can go back there and you can see how he describes it. Now, on East Island, not only does he have this realization, but Amalantra also appears to him in a vision.
Okay.
Shows him the codex of the Tao Te King and says, this is the real teaching. And this is where he also does his... the
Tao Te Ching is the real teaching?
No, the real meaning of that teaching, what's in the Tao Te Ching. Like all of the translations have garbled the teaching.
Okay.
So Amalantra appears to him and shows him the original codex for it.
Oh, okay.
So he does his, pseudo translation.
Wait, was that in the Amalantra working, or that was?
Yeah, it continued. The Amalantra working continued onto Esopus Island, but the
So is that information in the write up on the Amalantra working?
No, part of that diary is missing. That bit goes missing. I suspect that Charles Stansfeld Jones probably had those diaries and he destroyed them after alleging that Crowley did rituals to try and murder his wife. But this is when Jones has gone completely off his rocker.
Yeah.
Just before he dies. Anyway, so on this island as well is where he not only has this profound realization, which you could describe as something to do with being the way or the path or whatever. He also remembers past lives, one of which is being a disciple of Lao Tzu. So the drawing. Now there's much more. There's more stuff to this, but basically, in a nutshell, the drawing. It also featured in an exhibition that Crowley did called Dead Souls. Right.
Yeah.
I'll just say this a little bit. Crowley had it in a folio, and Kenneth Grant came to visit him. Kenneth Grant's a young man; he's like 20 and Crowley got older, And Grant's like, "Oh, I like this picture. Can I have it?" And Crowley said, "If you can tell me who it is, you can have it." So he comes back, 3 days later and says something like some Typhonian, Plutonian, alien, whatever. And Crowley says the usual thing: you can't help going off into fantasy or whatever, but you know what? You can have it, right? So then Grant makes his whole mythology around this image.
Yeah.
But it's Crowley described the image as being drawn from life, right? So in a nutshell, it's a drawing of Lao Tzu.
Okay. So want to see something funny?
Yeah.
Okay. So have you ever turned the picture upside down?
I might have done that in the past, and they also used to be a thing drawn on the. I don't know if that adds to you.
So, yeah, this is really funny in terms of how much Kenneth Grant, the Typhonian, and OTO made out of it. I'm going to go grab a drink real quick. You should turn it. Okay. It's in Gems from the Equinox there. You should turn it upside down and take a look.
So I think I know what you're going to say.
Yeah.
Can you see the?
Yeah.
Was it? You go on. You tell me what did he make something?
That looks to me either like just a depiction of a baby being born, or potentially one of his bizarre ideas about babies being born out of his ass. If you ever remember him reading him talking about that insanity, or some comment about the homunculus, essentially, I think is what that is.
Yeah.
So it's not the Transplutonian. I think that might be the obvious answer in plain sight. Or it could also be the birth of Lao Tzu. I don't know.
Yeah. So for me, so at least from Crowley's perspective, the stuff that he did with the Chinese wisdom, right? He considered that the supreme. The wisdom of the human race. Like it's the
Yeah, I was kind of talking about that in that "What's in My Bag" video. I was kind of pointing at that. Yeah,
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 yeah. And so at least for Crowley, that he saw that second to the Book of the Law as his highest achievement. He talks about it in terms of scholarship. I think that's a strong word, but he presents it in that way. And then so if you think about what Grant then did with that stuff, and the reason why you just see this stuff constantly about Crowley doing a work in that tore a hole in reality, and aliens, Greys came in,
yeah, yeah,
and all
yeah.
that stuff. It's like, well, look what's happened to his work. It's been murdered. Grant murdered it with his nonsense.
Hmm.
So
Okay,
that's my context for
interesting. And so, yeah, I mean, certainly, like, there's really not a whole lot of overlap between Crowley and Grant. I think that. So it sounds to me, I mean, like maybe I'm wrong, I don't know, but it sounds to me that when you're talking about kind of like these big forces moving through the world, that you're kind of pointing at something that Crowley was just like working with essentially the nature of how things are manifesting or something like that. Or you're suggesting that, well, what are you suggesting? I don't necessarily want to put words in your mouth.
You mean in terms of Crowley?
Yeah.
I think
What was he actually doing? Let me phrase it that way. Outside of the path of enlightenment and the spiritual quest and all of that, practically speaking, what was he actually doing?
Okay, well, so in one regard, because there's much more that I could say about this, and I want to save it, for the books or whatever. But he was reaching. This is what you have to do, right? If you're genuine about magic, right, then you have to reach back into the primordial past, deep into the past, which is what he does, and that has to be reborn here, like in the new. That's where civilizations come from. It's where cultures come from. If you've ever heard of someone called Peter Kingsley, he's talked a lot about pre-Socratics. He talks about it in this Parmenides and Empedocles and so on, intentionally seeding our culture, our Western culture, that kind of thing. And then Crowley's life is about someone who decides to serve the gods. That's what he does. And you can say lots of things about him being self-serving and all this other stuff, but he never.
I don't think so. I don't think so.
He never gets out of that. So he does something, and then he ends up. He goes through that process. It's a violent process. It takes him a long time to come to terms with the Book of the Law. He struggles with that, but in some ways, it's appropriate that it takes him some time before he can recognize that as his word. And you asked me that question of like, what do I think about in terms of spiritual attainment, that kind of a thing.
Well, there's spiritual attainment, and then there's whatever his results magic, shall we say, on world history were.
Well, here's the thing. He's told in the book he will be hidden behind a mask of sorrow.
Yeah.
That he will, like, he's failed, and that's how he's going to look for the rest of his life. That's how it's going to be.
And in posterity, and for posterity.
Yeah. However,
I put a nail in.
There will be success.
Yeah.
There is. Secretly, you'll be lifted up.
Yeah. And then that's all over the holy books also.
Yeah. So you can get, I could get technical about his attainments. I'll do that in the literature when I get around to writing that kind of stuff. But he should. People think that enlightenment or awakening or spirituality is going to live up to your already pre-existing political ideal.
Yeah. Of course.
No.
Yeah, and then of course when I get this all the time because every time I tweet, people are like, "You're not a real spiritual teacher," because I don't agree with their beliefs. Like, okay, well, I guess I just won't talk ever then. Maybe that's okay. Actually, there's a few that have done that. Okay, maybe that's why.
Right.
Tweeting.
The thing I would say with Crowley is there are stages in his life. You have to see what he's doing at each time and why he's doing it. And at a certain point, so when he gets old, when he's an old man, you'll notice he stops doing practical magic. At a certain point, that kind of stops and it changes. Charles Stansfeld Jones was of the opinion that he did that because he was terrified and realized he'd done the wrong thing. Gerald York thinks that he'd switched from trying to get the stuff to actually promoting it, and he was good at the first thing but bad at the second thing, right? Which you could say, but there's a much older tradition of understanding that a magician, after a certain point, the old magician doesn't do practical magic so much. They'll do the odd thing here and there because they become the magic. And when I say become the magic, I mean it in that very old sense that I talked about earlier. We talked about Heka, or the word,
Right.
which is something. It's the first thing. You could say it's the first thing, and where he so how he is as an old man, you'll find him frictionless. You'll find him. He'll talk about having rages and these kinds of things. Well, so did Ramana Maharshi. People make excuses for these people. They make all kinds of spiritual nonsense up to try and explain it away. When it's it's when they're at the finally as impersonal as you can be as a person. That's when they are fully human for the first time.
Huh.
He becomes fully a human being for the first time when he's old.
Wow, that's an interesting way of looking at it. You think at Netherwood or when?
Yeah, around that time. Yeah, around the latter part.
What for you is that? What marks that for you? I mean, what are you measuring that by?
Well, well, for the first time he has a child with someone that's just normal. It's just a normal relationship. And no, don't get me wrong. He's an awful father, but he's never going to be one. He was never going to be one. In the responsible sense. But he has a child. She's not a Scarlet Woman, and he's not the Beast. He just has a child with someone like a normal person. He does all.
I didn't realize that because he'd had so many kids already. He didn't have that experience till he was at Netherwood.
Sorry, no, this is pre-Netherwood. So I'll say, let's say the 1930s. Around that time is when the transition. When after he's done all the Magus thing, he's done the Abbey thing, all of that stuff, and he's passed through all of that. Black magical libel case around about this time.
Yeah,
he still brings it on himself, but that's the key. In some ways, that's like the key moment is that trial.
That's the Laughing Torso trial.
Yeah, it's like he's suing someone for libel, but he puts himself on trial.
Yeah,
and loses.
Yeah,
but writes in his diary he was success.
Huh.
Very curious why he does that, and no one has an answer as to why he does it. But this is what he does. And then it's this period of time as well where he writes all of his great stuff, all of his best stuff. Eight lectures, Magic Without Tears.
Well, there's maybe a practical thing there as well, as opposed to just spirit. There's a practical psychological thing there too, where it's, well, now he was free to get out of his own way because he didn't have to worry about his reputation anymore, which is what stops most of that. Worrying about your reputation stops more writers than any censor or writer's block ever will.
Yeah.
So that's interesting.
Yeah, but you can see that process of like when he's a teenager and he sins on purpose. There's no point in doing it. Just to annoy.
He was extremely methodical. To a T, perhaps, or perhaps to a fault even. But he was there's never a sense with Crowley, at least in how he writes, that he's acting in a non-intentional way. So he struggles, he has his failures, and the other thing as well is, like, he talks about his failures, and he has moments like where he's very clear about his persecution complex, about his masochism complex. All the best criticisms of Crowley come from him. He calls himself a coward. And that's, he uses, even when he delves into psychology, he does it for this purpose. It's for what can we say? Arriving at that final destination. Yeah. The nameless grave. Interesting. So, but you didn't necessarily answer my question of what do you think he actually did to the world? That did too. Strong language, but I'm just trying to make my point more clear.
I think he did what he said he was going to do, or what he thought he was doing. However, it's veiled like the sun is before it rises over the horizon. And it's precisely at that moment that it's the most, what can we say? There is a certain darkness, but there's also a certain kind, we might say a certain dissuasiveness or a certain terror traditionally associated with that moment before the sun rises.
Okay.
There is, what can I say? This is part of Egyptian tradition. There's interesting stuff about enigmatic Egyptian texts. That is only, I'll just say this, there's a cryptography with ancient Egyptians, like with their hieroglyphs on the walls, right?
Yeah.
And they tend to only appear around liminal spaces that are being described. And they don't serve, they're not hard to solve, and they're not really there to hide esoteric knowledge. It's there for the nature of the cryptography to demonstrate the content that's being described.
I'm not sure I understand.
Well, if I'm reading an account of God traveling into the underworld, Re, the sun traveling into the underworld, into the Duat, around the liminal spaces when they describe this in the text, that's where you get the cryptography. That's where you get it, but it's not hard to solve.
And what do you find when you solve it?
But just the description of what happens in that space.
Just a description of liminal space?
Yeah, stuff, yeah. But if you're reading it, it's like, why are they writing it in this way? And it's hard to understand. They're not writing it in the normal way. It's like coded.
So why do you think that is?
Scripting. Well, this is the thing. It only exists around those liminal spaces that are described. And it's not that hard to solve, but it's like the act of the reading demonstrates the content. If the sun is rising or even setting, the process of decrypting it is like revealing what has been hidden, or is it reveals what's really happening behind that veil. So you might think the sun is setting when it goes below the horizon, but really it's traveling into the underworld. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. So when the sun, to follow the metaphor, when the sun rises of Crowley's work, what will it be?
This is all cryptography. This is all Crowley's life. He's hidden behind a mask of sorrow.
When you say cryptography, do you mean literally the book?
There's some cryptography. There's some riddles in there in the traditional way.
Or do you mean that Crowley's life is cryptography?
Both. They're not. You can't separate them.
Yeah. That's an interesting way to look at it. I think that but the way that I always phrase it is I do think that Thelema is still a little too hot for TV, and so it's a slow burn on that one. And I have my own thoughts on that, but I think that whatever the Book of the Law is, it describes something. It certainly points to something. He's pointing to something that's there, or that is, we could perhaps more rationally say it's an interesting way of looking at the world, right? Like, forget all the mythology around it. It's an interesting philosophy. It's a philosophy, it's a conception of the universe, particularly because it's no longer geocentric. It's a heliocentric religious model that is, seems like it works fairly well for modern Western people. So I think, practically speaking, there's a lot of value there, until the tentacles come out and show up, of course.
Well, I think, although I think any sense of a new aeon or civilization will be far in the future, and the future should be left to the future, and that we won't see it, I nevertheless still think the sun is rising on Crowley. Yeah.
What do you think of his? And I agree with you. What do you think of his whole idea that the Western magical tradition, or Thelema at least, is a revival of the Sumerian tradition?
I think that the stellar of revealing is enough already. I think what is happening there, what happens with the book, like he doesn't. I mean, these aren't Sumerian gods. I mean, the connection there is the idea that ayahuasca might be connected in some sense, and for sure you can find, because this is really what it is, that there is a tradition behind the traditions. There's a tradition behind the cultures, and so of course you'll be able to find this thread.
So when you say that, I mean, do you mean that in the kind of theosophical, how do you mean that? Do you mean like in a theosophical sense, or like a perennial philosophy, or what? How do you mean that, the tradition beyond the traditions?
It's the thing that's alive that has an intelligence of its own. We refer to it as you could refer to it as magic. And it's what goes where it needs to go and give rise to traditions and institutions and that kind of a thing, wherever it needs to do it. And it can just as easily leave again and leave people with that carcass, like animating a corpse, which is what happens to a lot of traditions, and go wherever it needs to go. And it's not contained by human institutions or limited by them. It's why traditionalists with a capital T make a great miss when they think that they represent, well, even when they talk about perennial philosophy, I don't think perennial philosophy is a thing.
So say more about that. I'm curious, why is that a miss?
Yeah, I think that creation is best understood as a garden, and in that garden there are lots of trees or lots of plants, put it that way. And one way of thinking about what people do who engage with this tradition behind traditions is that they're like gardens, and they tend parts of the garden. And now parts of the garden have a lineage. Some parts are grown so far. Some of them, certain qualities of the fruit or plants in other parts have been favored over others. In some places it's dark and not much has happened. And that what's interesting about the garden is not that there's one garden, but rather it's in the difference between what's been cultivated. That's precisely where we get flavor from, right? In the not stretch the metaphor too far. In the fruit, that's where like the Universal movie is easy. Universal, but no one cares about the Universal. We care about the details where the conflict happens. We rub up each other.
The Truman stories also. I'm guessing you're using the garden metaphor with all the Enochian implications.
Oh, for sure, it's not mine.
Yeah,
it's also the oldest way of understanding creation.
Oldest how?
Oldest as in that this is an expression of a tradition that goes as back as far as you'd like to go. Well, I mean, obviously the Genesis myth is an expression.
Sure. Yeah, it seems like the traditionalists are looking for, they're looking for what everyone else appears to be looking for, which is their own exteriorized ideal that they want to find somewhere out in the world, where like they're going to find this perfect tradition that perfectly agrees with all their existing allegedly perfect political beliefs.
The weird thing is they talk about perennial philosophy. They say that that's what they speak on behalf of. Then they say, well, the best thing to do is pick the local tradition, right? Oh, but not Christianity. Maybe in the West instead, Sufism is probably suited more. But otherwise, it's like pick the local tradition. And then they immediately become traditional chauvinists. Like this is, oh no, my tradition is actually the best tradition. And then I don't know if you've noticed this, but they can display an extraordinary amount of learning, but there is not a whiff of personal experience of anything that they're talking about.
I have not. That's interesting. I haven't experienced that because I haven't really met any or hung out with any perennial philosophy people in real life. And the only one I did was also an AA person. So they had experience, but it was just really so that's interesting. And so you think it's an academic thing?
You can get it from just reading the text. So Guénon, Evola, NASA, you can read these people, and the learning that they display is very impressive.
And so when you say you don't feel they had any experience, what is it that they didn't have experience of?
Well, you can Crowley makes a great point in Magic Without Tears, right? He gets a letter from the student, and she's talking about his unserious manner.
Yeah.
He's always making corny jokes about stuff. And he makes a great point, which is, if you've done serious work, you can afford to have an unserious manner. right? Because you're not compensating for anything.
Yeah.
It's precisely those people that are sanctimonious. Yeah, they're that way to compensate for the fact they've done no serious work.
Well, that's interesting. So you're basically saying it serves the same function as light robes and beads and all of that. Yeah.
Yeah, but you can tell as well because you know, you can read people like Crowley. He tells you what he's done and how he's done it and how he's failed. And you know, and he can make silly pronouncements about stuff and whatever, but you can delve into that and look at it and you cannot deny that he's doing something and experience, right? You read a traditionalist, they don't talk about any of that stuff. They'll tell you about the great chain of being. They'll tell you what the Buddha thought about this, that, and the other. There is no contact with the messiness of being a human being, you know, and what it really looks like going through this process. I mean, it's the process is miraculous precisely because, you know, a schmuck like you can actually go through it and succeed. Like it,
Right.
Say you, I mean one, you know, as in.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, no, and everyone who does it can report similar experiences, which is kind of insane. It is certainly empirical, if not scientific.
Yeah. But it's precisely, Magia would say, it's precisely like the means of your binding, right, becomes the means of your unbinding.
Say more about that. Say more about that. That's interesting.
It's the position that you find yourself in is completely damned, right? It's fallen, right? It's not going anywhere. It takes a lot of work to actually see this fact that all of your best strategies, all the things you think you can do, all of your great ideas and opinions, all count for nothing, right? You're not getting out of the hole you think you're in. If you think you're getting out of that hole, it's just another hole. It just looks nice, right? You fooled yourself by your own false light, something like that. The magic comes in you saying yes to something else. Forget the appearances for a second. There's that something else. There's that thread. We can call it silent knowing, whatever words you might have for it, but you say yes to that instead. And sometimes you'll notice in your life that there'll be key moments where you make a choice. And there's not an infinite number of them. There's a number, you know, there's key moments where you say yes to something. Maybe you read a book that you wouldn't have read otherwise. Maybe you go and, I don't know, talk to someone or do something you wouldn't normally do, right? Yeah. But there's a choice gets made and you decide to listen to a different voice, a voice that isn't the same as the appearances, that isn't the voice of your culture. And and your culture probably says it's a load of shit. You shouldn't be doing it and it's childish or I don't know, whatever it might be, right? When you say yes to that other thing, that's when the great inversion happens. Suddenly, every detail in your life is unavoidably the unfolding of your eternal destiny.
Yeah.
It couldn't have been any other way, and everything is perfectly the way that it should be. And that which was damned and fallen, which you couldn't work your way out of, right? You can pretend to for a while if you want, spin your wheels, and this is what a lot of people do, and it's fine. They can do that if they want, right? But you're going to get there eventually. In magical terms, it's like you do loads and loads of magic, and eventually you realize that you're just perpetuating the same drama.
Yeah.
Or that life is getting better, and it's like, well, you know, I need to aim higher. I need to aim at something higher. But saying yes to the Holy Guardian Angel is like an example of this.
Oh, so that's what you mean specifically when you say yes?
That's one example of it in, you know, using that particular approach.
Okay. So practically speaking, if nobody had heard, know anything about either of us or Magick, but they were spiritually sincere and they wanted to understand what you were saying, what should they say yes to right now? What would you tell them?
I wouldn't be able to say. Usually it happens when you're young. Usually it happens, you don't even know how to put it into words. But I mean, my example, and I've mentioned this a number of times in interviews, is, I mean, one of them is seeing Crowley in that book and saying, onto it. I found the thing, even though it's horrendous. I found the thing. But more explicitly, when I was 15, I came, and I was as secular as you could be by that point. I had a horrible time in what you call high school, suppose secondary school. I came from a poor background. I was very aware of my social status.
Did you come from a religious background?
No.
Okay.
No. I mean, it was church. I went to a Church of England school, so that's how I got introduced to Christ and so on. But and there was Magic in Theory and Practice in this bookshop. It shouldn't have been in this bookshop. It wasn't a weird bookshop. It was just an end of the run kind of publishing outlet. Magic in Theory and Practice. I had the exact amount of money in my pocket. It's very cheap. And I had to wrestle with myself. Like, could I pick a book up that says Magick on it and take it to the cashier and pay for a book on Magick as a 15-year-old, right? Because in my mind, it's like, I'm not a child anymore. Like, only children with this stuff. But I bought the book, and that's like as trivial as it seems, and it always seems trivial on the surface. That's the point of it. It hides itself. Right. I said yes to something. And an inversion happened then. So now it was never, you never needed to get yourself out of the hole that you were in, because you weren't, first of all, you're not capable of it, but something miraculous is occurring instead. And that's the thing that you're now following. And it's the thing that you, by saying yes, you've agreed, how can we put it? You've agreed to live for that instead. You've agreed to live for that instead. And that happens, obviously this is, by degrees, and you can stop at any time you like. You can stop at any time you like. So at any moment you can say no again and decide not to do it. Invitation is always open, and you can tell after a certain amount of time, you can tell when, not that the invitation has been received, like withdrawn, but the direction you're going to go in is not following that thread. Well, I had that experience very clearly when I went to Kimbanda House in the UK.
Okay. Yeah.
I went to check out Kimbanda, and nope, it's like, that's not the. This is not it.
No, it's completely unrelated.
Yeah. So that's what I mean. That's real magic. That's what magic is. That's what. And I don't want to say this I don't want to downplay it into something, a spiritual metaphor for things. The more you proceed in following that thread, the more you will get what it is that will fulfill you in a way that you couldn't even guess. Right? You're not smart enough to ask for, and you get it precisely because you don't care about it anymore, because you're following this thing. So it's all given freely precisely because you don't care about it. The same is true with spiritual experience. Yeah. And then there's another kind of practical magic that you can do at the end. The third type of Magia practice that we teach is incubating, which is the oldest magical practice that there is. I won't go into it now because it's too much of a technical ramble, but it's how you get to see this world coming out of what we might describe as the unconscious. If you do some magic and you get synchronicity, right? And then you can guess about the mechanism, something like that. Right. This is that upside down. There is no mechanism to see. You see this world coming out of what it shouldn't be coming out of.
Wow.
And it can give you the heebie-jeebies. It can be another terrifying thing.
I'm not sure I understand, but I want to.
Yes. Well, maybe we can save that for another time, because I'm going to have to, it's 9:30 here. I'm going to have to.
Okay. All right. Well, yeah, we did 2.5 hours.
Time to put the kids to bed.
Okay. Well, this was excellent. It was awesome to finally meet you and talk to you. And I'm sure we probably have tons more to talk about. So there should be a next time.
Yeah, man. I really enjoyed it.
Awesome.
Yeah. Happy to talk whenever. Maybe when I've done the Crowley thing, I can come back on and about it.
What's your time scale on that?
I want to get the finished manuscript, maybe July, so it'll be published in the autumn, September, something like that. Oh yeah,
that's perfect. Yeah, that's perfect. Yeah, if you have something coming out that you want to promote, I'm happy to have you on the show.
Well, it's more that I want to tell you what I've discovered.
Oh, okay. Well, I want to know. So that's exciting.
I've discovered I had to have a day off. I discovered something, and then it was like, I need to have a day off because it's too crazy.
Okay, no, I definitely want to know.
Yeah, and it's
still, by the way, right when you said that, it's 3:33 p.m. here right now. So tell people more about where they can find out about you and your books, and what are your current projects? Like where can people?
My website is barbarouswords.com. You'll find loads of retreats on there, audio. There's the Magia retreat that's on there, Warp FM, the Ghost Ship talks. There's all kinds of stuff on there. You can get my books from there. Yeah, that's where I'm at.
All right, awesome. And the new the Crowley books coming out from Aeon or somebody else?
Yeah, it's from Aeon. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah.
All right. Excellent to meet you.
Yeah. Nice to meet you as well,
All right.
Jason.
Take care.